It only seems fair to kick off my reviews of the, for now, two cars that we can talk about from the January update in Gran Turismo, with, of course, by far, the most popular car of the update, the 2018 Suzuki Jimny XC. Now this, of course, is the smaller engined version to basically K-car specification, around 660cc, 63 horsepower, the kind of stuff that you'd expect from like your Daihatsu Cores and Suzuki Alto Works, that kind of stuff. Of course, the weight is not that high. It is four-wheel drive, so that adds a little bit, and it weighs just over a metric ton. About 1,030 kilos, so it's not the heaviest thing around, but it's not quite as light as some other K-cars, especially if you look back to the 90s or so. You can drop the weight, of course, you can tune up the power to up around the 150, 160-ish horsepower region. The point level is fairly modest. Stock, for example, it's only 261, which is pretty damn low, as is the price. It's dirt cheap, in fact. 18 grand is kind of insane for a brand new car in the dealership within the game, especially for something that's from 2018. As mentioned, of course, it is four-wheel drive, and as you would assume, it is, of course, turbo aspirated. You've got your low-range, mid-range, and high-range turbo upgrades, and of course you will want to pick those pretty carefully, depending on what you plan to use it for, because, as many players have also pointed out already, it's not exactly the strongest thing in a straight line. You can use it for some pretty cool track day stuff, and you'll see me here at Laguna Seca throwing this thing through the corners and keeping up with cars which have quite a bit more power, but you'll also see a number of times on the straights they absolutely fly past it and it doesn't stand a chance. So of course it's not that kind of car, and I will say it definitely feels more in its element off-road than it does on-road, which is kind of a duh statement to make because it's an off-roader, so of course it does. And speaking to the off-road aspect of it, I kind of love how this embraces, and there seems to be more of a thing in Japan where they appreciate this, and I wish the rest of the world did as well. They actually really appreciate something which I've been calling for years at this point, and that is combining old-fashioned looks with modern tech. There's a vehicle that I've technically done a deal on, which should be hopefully delivered fairly soon, which embraces this exact idea of a new car underneath with an old car on top, and even though this isn't an old car as such, I love the fact that it kind of has that old, like, almost mini Toyota FJ Cruiser, or I guess more accurately the old Suzuki Jimny, really, vibe to its visuals. You can tell it's new, but it kind of embraces the old, which is the total opposite to something like the newer Land Rover Defender, for example, or the newer Toyota FJ Cruiser, which they look great in their own way, but that's more of like a surfer dude kind of thing. They've embraced the more luxury side of the 4x4 market, whereas this, it has that more utilitarian look, like the little military roots of the Willys Jeep and that kind of stuff, and I think it suits it down to a T. It has a look of ruggedness but also simplicity, which of course is paid off by the fact that I'm sure this is a pretty damn reliable little thing in real life as well, as most small Japanese cars are. Now in terms of tuning this thing up, it really does depend on what you're going to use it for. As I alluded to earlier on, the only real downside is the top end straight line speed. Off the line it's not too bad, it's actually quite good out of corners as well, because the weight is so low and the vehicle is so small. Especially if you do put it on wider tyres, the stability is actually quite good, and it's so nimble without having the possible downside of front-wheel drive understeer, because of course the four-wheel drive more than counteracts that, especially depending on how you have the centre split. So it's actually a fantastic car through corners, and I would say that if you were only looking forward to this car out of the January update, you probably won't be disappointed, because that's the great thing about little cars like this. And not to keep referencing my own little relatively recently purchased Daihatsu Sirion, but those kind of cars, they have a huge advantage in a similar way to a classic car. Funnily enough, to reference also what I said earlier, you don't really have high expectations from a classic car, so it's much more easy to be pleasantly surprised. Likewise with something like a tiny little K-car, you don't expect it to be like a supercar level machine that's going to blow your mind. So when they do end up being, deceptively good through corners or on rally tracks, it's very easy to be impressed because the bar is so low. To me, that is one of the huge things working in this car's favour. It doesn't have anywhere near the horsepower of something like the Genesis Vision GT, which arrived alongside it, and yet for many players, they were looking forward to this more. To me, that speaks volumes. And let's be honest, that's more than just a Vision GT thing, because if you replace the Vision GT with maybe something else, like a variation of some other existing car that's just a more powerful version, well sure, there would be fans of it, but even then, I feel like a lot of people would be more excited for the Jimny. To me, this is a car which has very unfortunate timing. And this is the saddest thing about this car being added, for me personally. I think some of you might agree with this sentiment. I think that this is a fantastic choice of car to add to the game. It's just a really poor choice of timing, because unfortunately, as great and as fun and as charming and as cute as this little thing is, it's come at a time when most people are very disappointed by the update. So that kind of hinders this car's overall aura, which it really shouldn't. If this were part of like a 10-car pack in, for example, GT Sport, especially in the early days, or even in GT7 in one of the earlier packs, maybe in there with a circuit, I think people would be loving it and using it far more. It's a shame that it's kind of been caught up in the storm of bad timing, bad update, etc. But for those who are wondering what the car is like, maybe when you come back to the game down the line to update it, I don't think you'll be disappointed. It's a fun, cheap, charming little car with potentially quite a bit of use, both off-road and also for low point level events. So I'd love to hear your thoughts down below if you enjoy the car as well. Maybe you found it to be particularly good for certain career mode events or certain point levels maybe. Of course it has its own events in career mode now as well. But that's it for this initial review. Of course I will be talking about the Genesis most likely tomorrow, so stick around for that. And when we eventually get the Bulgari where we can actually use it in the game, of course I'll be talking about that also. But for now, thanks for watching.